All right, hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to Making the Argument. The first 100 days of the Trump administration are now complete, and we were invited to go up to the White House in order to conduct interviews for several people within the Trump administration, to include the Deputy Director of the CIA, a spokesperson for Customs and Border Patrol, not to mention the Senior Advisor for Counter Terrorism to President Trump himself. We got to sit down with each one of them and conduct some short interviews talking about the first 100 days, some of the accomplishments that have been achieved, and what to expect next. All of it on this episode of Making the Argument. Well, everyone, welcome back to Making the Argument. I am, of course, your host, Nick Freitas, and today we have a special guest. We're at the White House, and we're talking to Deputy Director of the CIA, Michael Ellis. Michael, you actually were an attorney over at Rumble and are now over here as the Deputy Director for the CIA. That seems like quite a transition.
That's right, and thanks, Nick, for having me on today. I was at Rumble, had 4 great years there, helping to build the company along with Chris Pavlovsky, the CEO, and a fantastic team of starting a free speech social media platform and really helping that grow and prosper. Before that, though, I was serving the first Trump administration as a lawyer here at the NSC for 3 years, as well as 1 year in the Intelligence Programs Directorate. So got some great experience working with many of the same folks who are now in the second Trump administration, and it's fantastic to see so many patriots back in government working to carry out the president's agenda. One of whom is Director Ratcliffe, who I had a chance to work with when he was the DNI.
Well, and that's the thing. You do have you have a diverse background. You have an important legal background. You also have a background within the intelligence community, and then you work for Rumble. So you're working for an organization that's very dedicated to free speech, and one might even argue fighting back against this tendency towards censorship, for transparency, and all of those things. Yeah. How does that impact? And actually, kind of leads me to another question here. And why do you think you were selected to fill this role within the Central Intelligence Agency?
Yeah. Well, again, I am honored, but this is the opportunity of a lifetime to help carry out the president's agenda. One of, I think, the things that Director Ratcliffe and I have really been focusing on is there were some real abuses that happened in the intelligence community in the past. We all know this now. Yeah. And some pretty shocking things happened in the past. These agencies and the authorities were politicized in ways that we never thought possible. But we have to turn it around, because these are important national security tools that the president needs to carry his agenda. Our aim, Director Ratcliffe and me, is to give the president a decisive intelligence advantage, that whenever he is sitting down in the meeting with a foreign leader, whenever he is making a decision about whether or not to use force, to deploy our men and women overseas, that he has the best possible intelligence available to him, and that gives him the advantage he needs to win. So that's what we're trying to do.
So, and let me ask you a question, because I agree with that. I know when I was serving over in Iraq, there was times where we had an opportunity to work with the agency, and there is a very important role to be played. But how do you rebuild that trust when it feels like there was significant portions of, we figured at the EPA, right? There would be ideological drive in a way that might try to thwart President Trump's first agenda, but then you get into areas like the DOJ, you get into areas like the DOD and the intelligence community, and you would think that there'd be enough of a focus on the national security mission that you could kind of exclude the maybe what you might call the petty partisan politics. But that wasn't happening. So what are the, here we are, the first 100 days of the Trump administration. What are some of the changes that have taken place that you think are going to help restore people's faith in the CIA to faithfully carry out its mission on behalf of the president and the American people?
Well, again, you're right that I think a lot of confidence was lost, and that takes time to rebuild, right? It's always much quicker to destroy trust than it is to rebuild it. But that's what we're trying to do, is to rebuild that trust. It starts honestly starts with the top, starts with leadership, with changing out personnel, and that's been the case across the intelligence community and in other parts of the government as well, that the bad actors in the past are gone. We have been carrying out the president's agenda when it comes to revoking security clearances of some of those bad actors, right? Making sure there's accountability for what happened, because we need to make sure that this kind of politicization can never occur again. But then, again, when we talk about restoring that trust, it's also just getting results for President Trump and for the American people. Whether it's bringing back wrongly detained Americans from Russia, as Director Ratcliffe did for Mark Fogel and Ksenia Karelina, or bringing terrorists to justice, the way we did for Jafar, one of the Abbey Gate plotters, whom CIA helped help the process of extraditing him to the U.S. where he can face justice for what he did. It's showing that kind of results and showing that, look, the CIA is going to be a tool that works for the American people, not against them.
So let me ask you this. We hear a lot about America first, right? And I think I tend to understand that when it comes to social policy, when it comes to trade policy, when it comes to those things. I understand where the administration is at. The one area where I would love to hear more is, what does that mean for foreign policy? What does American first foreign policy look like, and how does the agency play a role in that?
Yeah. So, it all starts with President Trump's agenda, right? Because under the Constitution, this is the lawyer in me talking, right? He's the commander-in-chief, right? The foreign policy of the United States resides with him. And so we take our priorities from his priorities, and that starts with China, right? China is the existential threat confronting America right now. It is the threat, honestly, that the foreign policy establishment in Washington was asleep to for years, right? The national security strategy of the United States, for administration after administration, said that it was our policy to enable the peaceful rise of China. President Trump was the one who turned that around in 2017. He was the first president to say, no, that's not our policy anymore, right? This is an adversary. We are going to confront them. And so we are implementing that priority at CIA when it comes to taking on that existential threat to the United States. Another area, though, when you talk about America First foreign policy, it's paying attention to what matters to people, what are the problems that they face in their everyday lives, and one of those is drugs. The deadly flow of drugs like fentanyl into the United States. And I think for too long, the intelligence community viewed that as somebody else's job. Yeah. And thought that was more of a law enforcement thing. It wasn't something the intelligence community worried about, right? We were worried about China and Russia. We weren't worried about drug cartels right across our border. And that's something that's changing now as well, that we are reorienting personnel, resources. We have combined the Counter Narcotics Center of CIA in with our Western Hemisphere center to form a new Americas and Counter Narcotics Mission Center, and really devote the prioritization and resources to this mission that it deserves.
So when we look at China as a threat, I almost feel like there was this moment when Reagan first took office, and it was the height of the Cold War, and it was, what's your strategy? He goes, we win, they lose.
Yes.
And it was this complete departure from détente. It was a complete departure from just coexistence. Does the Trump administration's policy toward China focus on this idea that, look, it's not like we want war or anything, but by the same token, we're no longer going to treat you like we're friends when you're obviously treating us like enemies?
That's right. President Trump campaigned on not starting new wars, obviously, right? But at the same time, he wants a fair competition, right? He wants a level playing field. And for too long, America has been letting China get away with violations of the rules, right? China was brought into the international order on the premise that they would start we'd start trading with them, and a lot of people assumed they'll follow the rules. We have decades of experience now showing us that was just flat out wrong, and that they cheated time after time. So for the intelligence community, there's certainly a role here that is similar to the role we played during the Cold War, the Soviet Union, the military and political axis of competition. There's also an entirely new role, I think, for the intelligence community in terms of economic competition and empowering the American private sector to really have a decisive advantage against China as well, because the competition of China it's different than the Soviet Union in that respect, right? And you see that playing out on so many areas of advanced technology, whether it's artificial intelligence or quantum computing or biotechnology. That's where the competition is of China right now, and we need to reorient the IC to and places like CIA to be able to prevail in that competition.
Do you see? So one of the things to that point, one of the things that's been a huge issue is telecommunications. The telecoms industry, our data centers. When you look at how quickly the internet came online, it's like the initial push was just get whoever's got the technology so we can get it integrated up and using. And Chinese telecoms are all over our infrastructure when it comes to that. Is this something that the CIA sees as a concern with respect to, this idea that they don't got to hack us, they're already there, and both from an economic and an intelligence standpoint?
Yeah. So there's obviously a big domestic component to that as well, and domestic area is not where CIA, but we don't want the CIA doing things domestically. That's, as you said, that's part of a broader government effort with other agencies. But you're absolutely right that the internet was designed to be open. It was not designed to be secure. And with Chinese telecommunications companies like Huawei. Again, that's another area where in his first administration, President Trump really turned around what the bipartisan consensus had been, right? People didn't think about this as a threat, weren't concerned about it, but there was a concerted effort in the first Trump administration to open everyone's eyes to Huawei and other Chinese telecommunications companies, and we're going to continue that now. And so there's a part of that that's domestic. There's also part overseas, right? That for our allies and our partners, that they shouldn't be installing Huawei into their networks either, right? And if they do, if they're choosing to partner with China, then we won't be able to work with them in the same way. So that's part. Again, I think that's all part of putting America first.
Well, let me ask you this kind of final question, because I know you're busy and I appreciate your time. If you had to highlight the top 2 or 3 accomplishments that you think have taken place within the agency during the first 100 days of the Trump administration, what would you highlight?
Well, again, I mentioned a little bit before, bringing terrorists to justice, right? Like bringing the Abbey Gate bomber back to the United States to face charges, bringing some wrongfully detained Americans home from Russia as part of President Trump's initiative to reset our relations with that country, and really bring these Americans back. But then also reorienting the IC in general, right? When I talk about getting the politicization out, Director Ratcliffe and I, we want the CIA to be the ultimate meritocracy, right? We want to have an elite workforce, but one that is also free of politics, free of bias, and we have to rebuild that trust that you talked about.
So no more recruiting commercials highlighting wokeism then at the CIA.
No, we want the best. And the issues are the threats that we face are too important for anything else, right? We can't afford to be distracted by this wokeness agenda. The mission needs to come first, and that's what we're going to do.
All right. Well, Deputy Director Ellis, thank you very much for your time, and certainly Godspeed on the rest of the term.
Thank you, Nick. Appreciate it.
Thank you. All right, hello everyone, and welcome back to Making the Argument here at the White House. And today we're sitting down with Ron Vitiello, who's been working with Customs and Border Patrol for quite some time. Can you give us a quick background for the audience?
Yeah, I started my career in Laredo, Texas in 1985. Worked my way up through the career positions in the Border Patrol, eventually becoming the chief at headquarters after 2 field command assignments, and then got nominated by Trump 1 to be the director at ICE.
Okay, so you have worked through several administrations then, and I appreciate that you came up through ranks. I was an enlisted guy in the military. I always say that's where the work gets done, but it's always nice when you have somebody that has done all the work from the ground up, get into the senior levels. What would you say has been like the primary difference doing this job between different administrations versus the Trump administration?
Well, in Trump 1 and certainly in Trump 2, there's just a real enthusiasm in practical terms, like to control the physical border and get our immigration system right. So we knew that was the mandate in Trump 1. Trump 2, it's exactly the same. It's probably the number 2 issue, worldwide as it relates to the politics, the operations, the intergovernmental stuff. But in Trump 2, we're much better prepared, and there's been a few surprises.
So do you feel like there's the proper support coming from Congress now as well?
Well, that remains to be seen. We are still on a budget that was created under Joe Biden. Like the foundation that we're working on is Joe Biden's budget. We're absolutely working the president's priorities within the operations at CBP, but we still lack a little bit of ability to scale and sustain what's being done. That's true for all of the DHS.
So yeah, it was fascinating to me to listen to Democrats say for 4 years that we needed a bipartisan border security bill in order to get anything done. And I was like, wait a second, Trump comes into office, puts the right people into position, and all of a sudden with the same power, same money, same authority, you guys are having the sort of success you are right now. So we're kind of celebrating the first 100 days. What would you say are some of the top level accomplishments that the Customs and Border Patrol have been able to achieve in that time period?
Well, on day 1, we ended the blanket abuse of parole by the executive branch. Joe Biden was giving a blanket parole to people from certain countries just because they asked for one. That is not how parole is supposed to work. As a career guy, we did very little paroles on the line when I was an agent, and it's all supposed to be an individualized assessment, and people get parole because it's in the interest of America or in the interest of humanitarian, like somebody's about to die and they need medical treatment. That's what parole is for. So we ended that on day 1. CBP 1 was shut down. And then the other thing that's the most important thing, we've got about a 97% reduction in illegal crossings at the southwest border. And what that means operationally is 97% of the workforce is now redirected to do the job we've asked them to do, which is monitor, control, and arrest people who are crossing the border illegally.
To give us an idea, because this is an important point that I don't think gets brought up enough. When Border Patrol is actually allowed to do their job at the border, you get to reallocate resources. During the Biden administration, or if you had to assume, right, we won't hold you to a specific number, but if you had to kind of guess, how many people with Border Patrol were having to do jobs that you wouldn't associate with Border Patrol because of how many people were in the country already?
Well, overall, the workforce of about 17,000 on the southwest border, I would say at least 40% of them were dedicated to the mission of making sure that there was care and comfort for the thousands and eventually millions of people who came into the country illegally.
Care and comfort, so they were babysitters.
Yeah, well, there's a process in which people have to come in and be booked into the system, right? You got to record their information and get them on the rolls as it relates to immigration violations and immigration court, et cetera. And so that's part of the job anyway, but when those thousands of people have young children with them, or they're infirm themselves, it distracts from the ability to go out there on patrol. And so 40%, but in some places where staffing wasn't adequate anyway, that's almost 100%. I mean, if you would have told me as a young agent that a couple of days during the Biden administration, more than a couple of days, 0 people patrolled the border in Yuma, Arizona.
You're kidding
I
me.
would have told you, you're out of your mind, that will never happen. That's not who the Border Patrol is. But in fact, in places like Eagle Pass, Yuma, Arizona for a time, they could not deploy to patrol the border because they were so covered up with the humanitarian mission that they couldn't do it otherwise.
I mean, this is like being over with a bucket trying to throw the water out and not being able to shut off the faucet.
100%. That's a very good analogy.
Oh my, so this just seems like on some level, I can, look, if somebody tells me there's incompetence within government, I've served in a state legislature for 10 years, incompetence in the government does not surprise me. That seems deliberate.
It is 100%. The transition team for Joe Biden spoke to career officials like myself. I mean, I talked to people that I knew that were going to be in charge of immigration policy and border security. And I told them what would happen if they did the things that eventually they did do. And what that really turns into is like, you've got people who advise the president directly, if not the president himself, the Secretary of Homeland Security, knowing if they take away the control levels that they were inherited through the previous Trump administration, that we were going to have chaos at the border. And guess what they did? They took all the control levels away. They did exactly what they knew would be the worst case scenario. And you're right, it's deliberate. There was a time in my career where I didn't believe that people were trying to flood the zone with illegal aliens from all over the world. But under the Biden administration, there's no question in my mind that people that were advising that president were purposefully letting people come into the country just because they wanted them all here.
Wow. Now, there's one other question I want to ask, because this always gets talked about. I've talked about it on my show before, and I just want to make sure I'm telling the truth, right? When we had it revealed, when DOGE revealed how many people had gotten Social Security numbers and things like that, and all of a sudden the press kept coming out repeating, like, no, they're here legally, they're here legally, they're here legally. And I started to read into it, I was like, wait a second, here legally, technically, means I cross the border illegally, I throw up my hands and I say, asylum, and then I get a court date, and because of the backlog, I could be waiting for years for that actual court date. Now I have automatically magically attained legal status. I can get a work permit after 6 months. Once I get that work permit, I can get a Social Security number. And I mean, did I embellish any of that?
No, that's true. And you had an administration that deceived the American public. And unfortunately, we have a press corps that will not challenge the facts from the left because the parole system made people, they still had an illegal status in the United States, but Joe Biden and his team called it a legal pathway. There is no established law in the immigration book that says there's a legal pathway if I give you a parole. If I give you a parole, that means you're in the country illegally until the government decides otherwise. And the same is true for those that you talked about that make these asylum claims, which are very specious anyway. They do not have legal status in the U.S. They've been granted a deferred action in the sense that they can't see the immigration judge today, so we're going to give them a summons to come back at another time. What we know about those people is many of them will not engage again in the court system to try to get themselves right with the law. They want to be released in the United States, and Joe Biden was doing that en masse. By government records published in the press, 11 million encounters by CBP at the southwest border. More than half of those people were released into the country.
All right, another question here. when it comes to actually being able to have the personnel now on the border, securing the border instead of doing the humanitarian component, what have you seen, not only with respect to stopping people from coming in illegally, but has there been a significant reduction, and basically have people attempting to enter the country essentially gotten the message that, hey, a new sheriff's in town?
Yeah, the numbers speak for themselves. Numbers aren't all the things, but the numbers are important. It gives you an orientation about where we're going. So the numbers are down about 97%. That gives you an increase in capability at the line. And then those that continue to try to invade are being prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. For most of the time that I was an agent, when we referred cases to the U.S. Attorney's Office, for a number of reasons, a lot of those cases would not be accepted. We're at a 97% acceptance rate in every district along the southwest border. So the federal crime of crossing the border illegally is being prosecuted in ways I've never seen in 40 years being around this work. Yeah. And it's not just that. We just established, the president signed an order establishing a military area on the border near New Mexico, El Paso. And if you cross the border in that area, you are not only entering the country illegally, breaking a federal crime, but you're entering a military base without permission, which is also a federal crime.
Yeah. So, jumping to Congress real quick, because I've been very impressed with the speed at which the administration has been moving and has been using the authority it's granted by the Constitution to act. But we all know that to some of this, the Congress needs to act as well. What are some of the things that Congress needs to do, and like right now, in order to make sure, because look, I'm a big fan of reducing the size of the government. I'm a big fan of what DOGE is doing, but securing the border is actually a legitimate function of the federal government and their constitutional responsibility. So what would you guys like to see from Congress that would help you do your job better?
100%, and I'll put it in two buckets. There's a lot of talk in this town about the reconciliation, yes. And we're eager at CBP to deploy the resources that would come to us in that regard. So that's about resources. That's about boots on the ground, sustaining the patrol function, building more wall, putting tech on the border to economize the work that agents do. So that's resources. And ICE needs the same, all of DHS needs the same. They need to scale up what we're doing and be able to sustain it over the long term. But true sustainability is going to be what the policy is. So the president has made a lot of choices. He ended catch and release. Yeah. He's said that these cartels, some of them have been designated as foreign terrorist organizations. So Congress needs to solidify those policy choices with legislation. So no one will be released at the border for a fake asylum claim, that we'll have actual consequences for those terrorist organizations that continue to invade at the southwest border. Congress has to backstop those policy choices with legislation, and they need to provide resources for sustainability. Two big buckets.
Okay, no, that makes a lot of sense. What is recruitment and morale been like recently?
So morale is better than I've seen it in a very long time. I think it's actually peaked above Trump 1. And it was pretty high when he was the president last time. And recruitment, all the numbers at CBP of first-time applicants and people that want to get in the pipeline to become an agent or an officer, those numbers are going up very well as well.
Now, to the extent that CBP does interact with local law enforcement, obviously we have sanctuary cities, we have things of that nature. I know in Virginia, as a legislator, we have tried to prevent sanctuary cities. And look, we've always made a distinction, right? It is not the primary obligation of state and local law enforcement to enforce federal law. But there's a big difference between not enforcing and openly obstructing. What has your experience been with some of these law enforcement organizations that you guys interact with pre-Trump versus post-Trump?
Yeah. In most of the southern border, with the exclusion maybe of California, the folks on the ground get it right. Yeah. Like those line operators, they're going to find a way to do what needs to be done to protect the communities in which they serve. Yeah. And so it works pretty well on the border. In the interior, it's a little bit dicier in blue cities and blue states like California. It's a little bit harder as well. In California, for instance, it's illegal for cops to assist ICE in immigration enforcement. So there's got to be a way to figure that out. I think the Justice Department has taken that out. The president signed an executive order yesterday requiring the Department of Justice to look at that problem and figure out how to fix it. So we're eager for that to happen. But since Trump was inaugurated, record numbers of 287G agreements. Virginia leaned in as well. The governor transferred, either on paper or in practical terms, the number of folks that have been housed in Virginia penitentiaries to ICE, that are here illegally, to ICE for removal. And so we want more states to do that, and ICE has secured a number of 287G agreements, which is a formal structure by which they trade information, training, and resources so they can capture people who are in the country illegally and have also committed crimes in their community.
Yeah. Well, no, it's fascinating. I had a bill this year in the Virginia General Assembly where we said, look, if you have been identified, arrested, convicted, and served your time for a violent crime, there's no maybe handed over to ICE, there shall be handed over to ICE. And the bill didn't even get a hearing. I don't think most people understand. They think of this as exclusively a federal issue, but if they really want to get to providing some of the support they need at the state and local level, a lot of that fight is with your governors, it's with your state legislatures, and doing that work. Have you found, because when I look at the southern border, and especially, I see a state like Texas, maybe a state like Arizona, a little bit more willing to work, and then some states like New Mexico and California. Is California just openly obstructive with respect to what you're trying to do?
Yeah, I wouldn't say they get in the way, because the boots on the ground, they find a way to work the things out, but in California that would be real jeopardy if they assisted directly.
Yeah.
And so we just make it work, and on the border in a place like near San Diego, we're the biggest resource as it relates to securing the border. So in most cases, where we need help from the sheriff's office or from a local PD is when we're doing a planned enforcement operation, or maybe a chase, or where there's people running through an area or whatever. So we don't really call on them to do the day-to-day, but when we do, you want that cooperation because it makes everybody safer.
Yeah.
And so these jurisdictions that engage in this hyperbole that says, we're not going to help the federal government, it's a federal responsibility. Yeah, it's a federal responsibility, but the law works in a way that they can help us without jeopardy. Yeah. They can help us to improve conditions in those communities. When I was a young agent on the line, I could send a detainer a document that allows the sheriff to turn somebody over to me when they're done in the county jail. I could do that on the hood of my car. The sheriff would take it, and when that sentence was over, they would call me about that individual. We need to get closer to that. Barack Obama used to be called the deporter-in-chief.
5.3 million.
Why did they call him that? Because George Bush left him a system called Secure Communities, which was a program at ICE that if you were booked in a county or a state or a city in America, and you were foreign born, that would be an automatic referral to ICE, and ICE could refer back to those they wanted to detain with an electronic detainer, and that worked flawlessly. That's why he deported so many people.
Wow. Well, let me ask you this. If you had to pick one, we talked about several things here, but if you had to pick one thing within the first 100 days that you would say, like, this is it, this is something that really just encaptures kind of the change from the Biden administration to the Trump administration, what would it be?
It's that preparation for all the layers of activity. We're not just going after one target as it relates to immigration enforcement. We're using every tool available, some that are really old, some that are brand new, some that they've just thought of. And then I'm very impressed by Trump's, the administration, leadership of Kristi Noem, all the interagencies, all her cabinet secretary colleagues are leaning in to make sure that we're being successful on behalf of the president. The ease in which the interagency is operating is something I've never seen.
Really. What do you think what do you think the barriers were before? Do you think it was just kind of a natural problems within bureaucracy, or did you see genuine obstruction between different agencies in order to prevent?
It was 100% both. I think even those that were on Trump 1's team in the cabinet, they saw the DHS problem as a DHS problem. Whether they can contribute or not, it was somebody else's problem. They had their own set of agenda items that they wanted to advance on behalf of the president. We don't have those seams anymore. Yeah. Everybody is working in the same direction.
That is great to hear. Well, once again, thank you very much for being with us here today. Thank you for not only your service in your current position with Customs and Border Patrol, but really for a lifetime of service in this area. We know it's a dangerous one. I don't think most people appreciate just how dangerous it gets there, especially with the cartels and terrorist organizations like them. But it's certainly appreciated here. So thank you very much.
Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you. Appreciate it. All right, hello everyone, and welcome back to Making the Argument. This is an interview I've been looking forward to. Not the first time Dr. Sebastian Gorka and I have spoken, but it is the first time since you've been back in the White House. Is it good to be back?
I just walk around the White House with a big grin 12 hours a day, living the dream, killing jihadis for the boss. I've only been waiting about 26 years for this job, Nick, so yes, it is rather good to be back.
Well, and you've done a lot of work on it on the education side, on the operational side, all of it. So let me ask you this. One of the things I've been really curious about is we've all been living in kind of this post-World War II and then post-Cold War era, and all of the alliances, all of our strategies, all of our the way we formed all of this was kind of rooted off of that dynamic, and now we're moving into this new dynamic, and I feel like this is the first administration that's really been trying to actually figure out what does American foreign policy look like going forward. What would you define as America first foreign policy?
Yeah, superb question. So I have several segments because I'm not here to do foreign policy. That's Secretary Rubio, that's the president. We have a member of the National Security Council who's right now writing the new U.S. national security strategy. I hold the pen on the new U.S. Counter Terrorism strategy, so mine has to be nested under all of that. And I touch upon it and I say, hey, let's understand what America first means. Number one, it doesn't mean America alone, okay? The isolationist wing of MAGA is wrong. We're not closing down the shutters on the Pacific and the Atlantic. We are engaged, we're decisive, whether it's taking out the Houthis or a bunch of Wagner mercenaries in Syria, as we did in the first Trump administration. But it's the end of forever wars. It's the end of this idea that we're going to do regime change and turn Afghanistan into Switzerland. That's over. But we are using force where force is necessary in the interests of the United States and her citizens. And what is missed with America First and Peace Through Strength is this underlying concept of sovereignty. We believe that to function as a nation, you have to have sovereign control of your territory, which starts with having borders. If you don't have borders, you don't have a country. God bless Tom Homan, Stephen Miller, Governor Noem, the 98% closure of the border, the hundreds of thousands of illegals, the worst of the worst, the rapists, the child molesters, the fentanyl smugglers that have already been removed from this country. So number one, we're going to exercise sovereignty, and we're going to expect our friends and allies to exercise sovereignty and to step up to the plate. If you say you're a friend of America, you better act like it. You better spend money on your defense. And when we have a common threat, whether it's legacy AQ, whether it's ISIS, you better be joined with us at the hip to take those targets out. But we're not going to do 20-year wars anymore.
And again, as someone that fought in one of those wars, I'm very glad to hear that, because I look at this as I want the United States to be a good ally. I don't want us to be a sugar daddy. And I feel like that's what we've been for several decades now. One thing I want to talk about, because a lot of times when we think about counterterrorism, we do think primarily about some of the jihadist organizations that we've had to fight in the Middle East. And I think that's an important component, will continue to be one. But now we've also designated certain cartels, I think appropriately so, as terrorist organizations. How do you foresee counterterrorism being, or our counterterrorism strategy being implemented in that realm?
So first, let's explain the underlying justification, the logic. And I did this math on my Newsmax show about a year ago, because I said, okay, let's talk Turkey about the threats to America. And I sat down and I added up all the KIA, all the killed in action from U.S. branches of service since the end of World War II. So that's 45 to the present day. So that's Korea, Vietnam, Panama, Grenada, Gulf I, Gulf II, and Afghanistan. Nick, if you add up all KIA, it is 103,000 Marines, soldiers, airmen, sailors, and Coast Guards. At the same time, I decided to look at deaths as a result of cartel activity. And I went to Biden's CDC website. It was hard to find, I had to dig for it, but I found it. In the second year of the Trump administration, because of Harris's and Joe's open border, 110,000 Americans were murdered by fentanyl and other illicit drugs. So let's do the math. 75 years of warfare killed less Americans than 12 months of open borders under Biden. So President Trump rightly has declared war on the cartels, along with Stephen Miller, Secretary Rubio at DOS, Secretary Noem, Tom Homan. We have designated 6 cartels and 2 international gangs as FTOs, as foreign terrorist organizations. and we're going to take the fight to them in collaboration with the Mexican government, with other partners in the region. We are going to make them combat ineffective so that they're not murdering hundreds of thousands of Americans.
So one of the common arguments whenever we talk about the cartels, and people want to put it more into a criminal organization, I always like to say these are not mutually exclusive. You can be a criminal organization and a terrorist organization, but they want to treat it as it should be purely law enforcement or primarily law enforcement. And then the other argument that I will hear is, Nick, this is drugs. There's such a demand for drugs that it doesn't matter what you do, there's always going to be somebody else that picks up the mantle and carries on. What is what is a more militant response to the cartels really going to do with respect to degrading their operations?
So this isn't the mafia, right? This isn't just a criminal organization. This isn't like a, car smuggling ring in LA. Let's be honest about Mexico or other countries of the region. There are parts of hemispheric nations south of the border where the government does not exercise sovereignty over their landmass, where the local mayor and the local police force do not control that county. It is the cartel that controls that piece of landmass. When you are, you know this, you're a special forces guy. When you control and when you capture and control territory, you're not a criminal, you're an insurgent, right? You are a paramilitary force. It's the measurement of power when you're holding territory. This isn't just criminal. These are criminal organizations that are also at the next level of threat because they hold territory and they function as a quasi-state or sub-state. What's it going to look like? And look, the fact is we've been doing some very interesting and successful things with certain vetted elements of the Mexican armed forces and police forces already for decades. We're going to ramp that up and we're going to make it. Look, I don't want to go into details.
Sure, yeah.
You also need to talk to Stephen Miller as well. But a combination of decapitation of the leaders, a combination of targeting the stuff that is really, their center of gravity, how they move money, the chemists and the scientists that run the labs, that refine the precursor chemicals that are coming from China, that is now, excising revenge against the West as some kind of payback for the opium wars. You've got to hit their various centers of gravity until they decide, you know what? I'm going to go back to selling, chopping cars or selling marijuana. I'm not going to be killing 110,000 Americans. Think about this. I have a former FBI guy who now does drug rehabilitation in the prisons in Virginia. Why don't you hear a lot about recovering fentanyl addicts? Because they don't recover, they die, right? So that's the reality of the situation.
So let me ask you this. El Salvador is probably a perfect example of this, of a country that was completely dominated by a foreign or for there it was a domestic terrorist organization, MS-13. And Bukele was given special powers within their parliament. They actually used a legal process to do that. And look, we can argue all day long on the civil liberties component. I think all of us truly value civil liberties. We want to live in a free country. But there was a point where you reached a critical mass in El Salvador where the only people that were free was whoever MS-13 said was free. And the government operated incredibly swiftly, brutally, but effectively and toward the right people. Do we look at what's going on in El Salvador as kind of like, look, this is once your country has reached a point where organizations like the cartels have this much control over your country and your population, you have to take sweeping measures and overwhelming force in order to kind of reset the game. Is that an appropriate way to look at it?
I don't think the analogy holds with America because...
Well, not with America, but like combating cartels in Mexico.
Yeah, look, it's a very simple question. Is the nation functioning? When the electorate chooses a new government and the government comes in, does that government, does the federal police force, does the defense minister, do they exercise sovereignty over the country? If they don't exercise, if you go to a disco on Friday night and the local cartel and this isn't, if you don't believe me, it's okay, just look it up, rolls severed heads onto the dance floor at the discotheque to send a message, you don't have a functional state. It's very simple. I mean,
So you have
the
to
metrics
take
matter.
control.
Let me tell you a story from General Ospina. General Ospina broke the FARC in Colombia. He's the leader who did it, Carlos Ospina. And I was honored to be on the faculty with him at National Defense University when I worked in the Defense Department. And he'd always talk about how Americans, always concentrate on the wrong metrics. In Afghanistan, we always counted the wrong thing. I remember going to McChrystal's Friday VTCs and we were always counting SIGACTs. Remember SIGACTs? Like, how many IEDs were there in Wardak province? And we had less SIGACTs this week. And I'm thinking, hang on a second. You could have provinces of Afghanistan where you have 0 SIGACTs because the Taliban are running the province and they make sure that there are no... so we measure often the simple stuff to measure, which is irrelevant. And General Ospina made this point one day with regards to Colombia? Yeah, Colombia. He said, when we went into a contested area of Colombia to reassert, I had one real measure for the effectiveness of the FARC. Where did the mayor of the town sleep? If he slept in his home, then we're good. If he slept 20 miles away in his brother-in-law's compound with 20-foot high walls, then he wasn't the mayor, FARC was the mayor, right? And that's a metric. Where does the mayor, have you ever seen a PowerPoint slide from the DOD that measured where the mayor lives?
No, of course not.
Right?
No, we like to practice Excel spreadsheet warfare. What is easy to count?
By PowerPoint, right?
Yeah, it's the Goodhart's laws. When a measure of success becomes the target, it ceases to be a good measure. No, we saw that all the time, and I remember starting to ask questions like, maybe we should be measuring how many people are actually willing to talk to us in this village without a mask on. But no, it was how many HVTs did you get? Well, what's an HVT? Whatever we say an HVT is, right? So let me ask you one other question, because I know you got to go here quickly. Looking at the first 100 days and looking at the major differences between Biden's approach to counterterrorism and the Trump administration's approach to it, what would you classify as some of the highlights? What are some of the big wins in the first 100 days of the Trump administration?
Read my article in Breitbart yesterday. 100 Days of Killing Jihadis is the title. I've never had
it was something subtle.
It's Breitbartian. I've never had an article that in 12 hours had 4,200 comments, not likes, 4,000. So look, it's very simple. It's the story of day 8 of the administration. Mike Waltz, former Green Beret, National Security Advisor, myself and a JSOC member of my team walked into the Oval Office with a classified op plan and some satellite imagery of a ISIS terror compound, a cave complex in northern Somalia. And we showed the president some imagery of this leader of ISIS walking around this compound like he's in Disneyland. And we said, this guy is super important, sir. He's a high-value target. He's ISIS leadership. And we've been watching him for a year and a half. And he said, what? What do you mean? Biden and Jake Sullivan watched this guy for a year and a half, and he looked up from the Resolute desk and he said to Mike, kill him and kill him now. And he got out the Sharpie pen, he ticked the go box on the op order. We went back to my skiff, my guy called up the various units. Less than 30 hours later, Saturday morning, we're back in the White House, under the West Wing, in the, famous Situation Room with the screens showing us live imagery from our platforms over Somalia. In walks Mike at, the go time was 9:50. Mike walks in 9:48. We're like, oh my gosh, where's the National Security Advisor? 9:50, like clockwork. We're watching this high-value target turn into some, red mist, and that was day 11 of the administration. Since then, I'm proud to say, excluding our operations in Yemen with the Houthis, our guys have killed 74 high-value targets from ISIS, ISIS-K, Al-Qaeda, because we're back in the counter. If you've got American blood on your hands, we're going to come and find you, kill you, or bring you back to America, as we did with Jafar the true architect of the Abbey Gate bombing that took 13 of our brave servicemen and women from us. I was there on the apron with Tulsi, with Cash, with Ratcliffe, with Bondi, as that man landed on U.S. soil to be brought to justice. We're taking counterterrorism very seriously, thanks to President Trump and thanks to Mike Waltz.
Well, I'm really appreciative of that, and I know Mike too. I've known him before. He was in Congress and whatnot. But I will tell you this is, again, as a combat veteran who fought in a war where we were going to rebuild an entire country and our image. I want to say one of the things I appreciate most about the administration's approach, and I think this is really important, and it started with Soleimani. Yes. It was this idea that our response is not going to be to kill a bunch of Iranian civilians. It's not even going to be to kill a bunch of Iranian conscripts.
Or to change a regime.
Yeah, or Iranian conscripts. It's going to be send a very clear message to the people actually perpetrating this and make sure that they're the ones that pay a price. Because honestly, I've noticed something about some of these terrorist leaders. They're really good at sending other people off to their deaths. They're not so key about them going themselves. And it's great to have an administration that realizes we can do that without trying to nation build at the same time.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you again for your time. Really appreciate it, Doctor, and hopefully we'll see you again here soon.
Anytime. God bless. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.